Hello children. In this video, let us discuss about the next part of the lesson, Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. On the day of the inauguration, I was overwhelmed with a sense of history. In the first decade of the 20th century, a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War and before my own birth, the white-skinned peoples of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned peoples of their own land. The structure they created formed the basis of one of the harshest, most inhumane societies the world has ever known. Now, in the last decade of the 20th century and my own 8th decade as a man, that system had been overturned forever and replaced by one that recognized the rights and freedoms of all peoples regardless of the color of their skin. That day had come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. That long and noble line ended and now began again with me. I was pained that I was not able to thank them and that they were not able to see what their sacrifices had wrought. Dear children, in this part, Nelson Mandela describes the system of government in his country in the first decade and in the final decade of the 20th century. Nelson Mandela tells that in the first decade of the century, the whites erected a system of racial domination against the blacks, thus creating the basis of one of the harshest and most inhumane societies the world had ever known. In the final decade of the 20th century, the previous system had been overturned and replaced by one which recognized rights and freedom of all people regardless of color of their skin. Nelson Mandela remembers about days gone by which will soon be the part of history where the whites had formed a system of racial dominance against the blacks. It was the basis of the harsh societies which were now overturned. He says that the policy of apartheid, that is, policy of racial segregation, created a deep and lasting wound on his country and its people. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. All of us will spend many years, if not generations, recovering from that profound hurt. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another unintended effect, and that was that it produced the Oliver Tambos, the Walter Sisulu's, the Chief Lutealis, the Yusuf Dados, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Sobukwe's of our time. Men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity that their like may never be known again. Perhaps it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. My country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath its soil, but I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. Dear children, Nelson Mandela further has written that apartheid, a political system that divides people according to their race. The policy of apartheid could not be considered fortunate for the people of South Africa because it created distance and a deep wound in the country and the people. On the auspicious day, Mandela regretted the loss of thousands of people and remembered that their sacrifices for the freedom from discrimination. He thought of himself as the sum of all those African patriots who sacrificed their lives before him. He was pained that he couldn't thank them. He recalled great freedom fighters like Oliver Tambos, Walter Sisulu, Chief Lutali, Yusuf Dada, etc., who were the men of uncommon courage, wisdom, and generosity. Depths of oppression creates heights of character. Nelson Mandela illustrates this by giving examples of great heroes of South Africa who sacrificed their lives in the long freedom struggle. Nelson Mandela also tells that my country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath the soil, but I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. It is from these comrades in the struggle that I learned the meaning of courage. Time and again, I have seen men and women risk and give their lives for an idea. I have seen men stand up to attacks and torture without breaking, showing a strength of resilience that defines the imagination. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Even in the grimmest times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second, but it was enough to reassure me and keep me going. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. For Mandela, courage does not mean the absence of fear but a victory over it. According to him, brave men need not be fearless but should be able to conquer fear. People should love others and not hate them due to color or religion. Love comes naturally, not by force, which is the natural goodness. Mandela also gives an instance that even in the grimmest times in prison, when he and his comrades were pushed to limits, he would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the gods. Perhaps it was just for a second, but it was enough to reassure him and his fellow mates and keep going. Nelson Mandela also tells that man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. Dear children, in this part we have discussed how Mandela describes the system of government in his country in the first decade and the final decade of the 20th century, what courage actually means to Mandela, and what does he think, whether love is natural or hate is natural. I hope you have understood this part. Happy learning.